This is Sporting Life.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Sporting Life Racing podcast. I'm Ben Linfoot and I'm joined by Graham Cunningham, David Johnson and Billy Nash this week. The old band are back together, not the only band reforming in the UK this week. And we might play a little game of definitely maybe in reference to Oasis as we reflect on York and everything that happened at the Ebor Festival and as we look ahead from that into the autumn. So a few questions for the panel as we go through the podcast. But first of all, I'm going to pass over to you, GC.
Morning, everyone. Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely, maybe. I'm looking forward to that. Game notes, quick. I've read these back and it makes me realise I'm only bothered about two things in this sport now, the racing and the weirdness. And unfortunately, both aspects were great last week. So here we go for this week's game notes. The first rule about York Club, you don't gripe about York Club. So let's gloss over a crowd drop, sprint track bias, marking the Japanese presence by swapping steak pie for sushi in the press canteen, disgraceful, and focus on City of Troy, ruthless from the front. Breeders' Cup Classic is another test, but he's by a Triple Crown winner with a relentless hard-running style and a time form 130. Lads, just imagine seeing him triumph at Del Mar in the very same week that Trump gets shit-canned. Goosebumps. Aiden, again, with the Justifies are like Galileo's with more class. Justifies, like Galileo's, but with 90-odd fewer Group 1 winners. Content, still on the up after 12 runs. That's a Galileo. The Lion in Winter, clinical Acom success. Good luck trying to beat him in the Goffs Million. Los Angeles doesn't do an ounce more than necessary. Vauban heading back to Melbourne. Magical Zoe joining him. But the Eurostar I'd really like to see at Flemington is still Tower of London. Bradsell, couple of cheeky 10.4s to set the Nunthorpe afire. Love that. Love it. Matt the Brock, canoodled at 33s. Love that. Love it. Tom Clover, 3-2-1 from just 3 runners at York. Ted Rogers, John and Sean Quinn, 2 from 2 with James Jungle and Breege. Cocky double that. George Boffey, second with Believing in Shah from just 2 Ebor week runners. Now a career 0 for 30 at York. But keep at it, G. You'll break that duck soon, and then you'll be Boffey the Knavesmire Slayer. Thank you. Pat O'Donnell, love that guy. John and Thady, slim pickings. Annual rounders match between ITV and Sky Bet. Big win for them ITV boys. But a rare case when it isn't just the loser who goes away to reflect. Trainer Aidan Keatley reflects on a Leopardstown gamble by saying, I just happened to come across 2,000 quid in a pair of socks. Then put it on the poll. Have you ever come across a stray £2,000 in a pair of socks? Racing blogger respects the homeless ex-jock outside Del Rio's, but can't spare him any change. Wow, that was a bad segment. Also, bring back the stallion. Champions full gallop. In like a lion, out like a lamb. Still, at least we got that market-raising crowd spike. The league, the racing league, in like a lamb, out like a lamb. Can't go round again, can it? Finally, gents, them jumps boys, winding up for winter with working back from Cheltenham nonsense. You know we can only hold them back for so long. There's plenty of meat left on the flat bone this year, and the first rule of Flat Club, in August at least, is you don't talk about the Jumps Club until November. Lads, those are the Ebor Week game notes.
Thank you very much, GC. Enjoyed the return of the game notes, and York nicely surmised there. It was a fantastic week, and we're gonna kick off our definitely maybe theme here with you, Billy. And the first one to ask is we've got to start with City of Troy, the poster boy of the season. But the question is, Billy, will City of Troy win another top level race this year?
Some might say that he will, Scoop. I think
he's gone off kilter already.
Yeah, I think there's a really good chance that he will. I think this was definitely a career best performance. As you see by the figures, he's up to 130p. He looked really good on the day. Whether it was by accident or design that he ended up in front, I think it really suited him. We saw last year he was very good from the front as a 2-year-old. And I think making his own running, it certainly helped him. I think if anything in the Eclipse, Hans Andersen was possibly a little bit of a hindrance to him. I think Ryan Moore kept having to take City of Troy back. He's got such a big stride. He covers an awful lot of ground. And I think it suited him being in front. I think York really suited him. And he was very impressive. He won quite well. Again, the only slight negative, and it is, looking ahead to the Breeders' Cup Classic, which is where we're probably going to see him next, he did hang out to his right again in the straight. It's a common theme with him. He did it at Epsom up the Camber, which very few horses do. He hung to his right at Sandown, and he hung to his right again at the weekend or last week. Now, clearly, it's something Ballydoyle are very aware of because he has run 4 times this year. Apparently, he's running 4 different bits. So they're trying all little different things to keep him straight. But regardless of whether he stays straight or not, he's a very, very good racehorse. He's really effective. I think he's probably the ideal type for a Breeders' Cup Classic. I've no idea how good the home team is, but just on basic time form ratings, he's certainly as good as the 3-year-olds in the States. I think Fierceness on 127, who won the Travers at the weekend, is one of the top, if not the top 3-year-old dirt horse in the States at the moment. No, I'd stand corrected on that one, but he's certainly close to the top. So City of Troy's 130p would put him bang there with the best of the 3-year-olds. I'm not really sure how good the other American horses are, but he'll go there with a live chance. And, hopefully it would be great to see him do it. I think he's Ballydoyle's best chance of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fully invested in this Coolmore, Aidan O'Brien trying to win the Breeders' Cup Classic with a European turf horse project, because it started with Giants Causeway, didn't it, back in 2000. They've had 16 goes, and it would just be fantastic for one of them to go and do it. DJ, I read a story in the Racing Press, I think it was from Ron Wood, saying he had absolutely no chance in a Breeders' Cup Classic, but he's a son of Justify. It's just a story we want to see develop. We want to see him go out there and have a go, don't we?
Hopefully, yeah, that's what we would like to see at this stage. I think it's a little bit of a shame that we're not going to see him taking the Irish Champion Stakes on the way. That looks a good slot for him before he heads off to America. But just to try and put some context into what he's going to be out in America trying to achieve, we looked at the Timeform database, and I could find only 4 horses that have earned a rating in excess of 130 on both dirt and turf. And they are Dubai Millennium, Saki and Giants Causeway, that obviously both did it in defeat in a Breeders' Cup Classic. And then you've got Sing Spiel as well, who, like Dubai Millennium, won a Dubai World Cup. So they're the only 4 that have done it on dirt. There's a couple of others that did it in that brief period when there was a synthetic surface, the Pro Cush or whatever it was called, the Pro Ride out in Santa Anita, the likes of Ravens Pass. And I think Wise Dan achieved a rating of over 130 on both surfaces. But that was, again, a synthetic surface rather than dirt. So City of Troy, if he can go and do it, maybe he will be worth some of those accolades that Aidan O'Brien is still sort of putting towards him, because, okay, he's time for 130p, but, look at other horses in the stable. High Chaparral, the same rating. Rocker Gibraltar, 133. St. Mark's Basilica, 132. He had 5 Group 1 wins. Rocker Gibraltar, 7 Group 1 wins. City of Troy, still only 4 Group 1 wins. So they keep saying all the right things about him, but what he's done it still doesn't back up on track. So there's time for him yet, fortunately.
He can get there, GC. Do you think he can improve that rating going forward?
Yeah, there's some great points made there, but the problem is it looks as if there's not much time because it doesn't look like he's going to go to Leopardstown for the Irish Shakes. It looks like he might go straight for the Classic with a spin either at Southwell or Southampton. I'm not sure which. I'd favour Southwell myself. But seriously, he could win the Classic and then be gone. And that would be, it would leave us still wanting a little bit more, I think. Giants Causeway, little by little, another Oasis reference there. He built up his reputation and affection by running hard and often. He went from winning the International at York to winning the Irish Champion Stakes, getting turned over in the QE2, and then came within a few inches of winning the Classic. Declaration of War probably not inherently as good a horse as City of Troy. He won the York race, went very close to winning the Classic. So it's a natural progression, and I'd love to see him have a go. There's a significant Japanese presence as well. Don't forget, Forever Young, Dermo Satagaki are both likely to go for the Classic. So it will be a hell of an international race. But I'm just slightly concerned that this horse, for all that he's 130 with a P, for all that he's the dominant horse this season in an otherwise fairly middling 2024 campaign, he could even win the Classic, and we'd still be thinking, I wonder if he'd stayed around at 4. I wonder if he'd raced a little bit more often. For the moment, he's got 3 big Group 1 wins here in Europe this season. I hope he goes to America, but a bit like David touched on, the Irish Champion Stakes is a hell of a good race. It's a race that Coolmore tend to really treasure, and to miss it this year with a horse who's right at the peak of his powers now would seem a little cautious, wouldn't it?
It seems very un-Coolmore-like when you consider how well that they've always supported their home races. It was enough of a surprise that he didn't take in the Irish Derby, given what they've done with all their other Derby winners from Epsom before. So we're going to actually potentially end up with the case that this horse isn't going to run back in Ireland at all since his debut, has he? Every race since has been in the UK.
Absolutely, bang right, yeah.
For a horse that they're saying is so good, and the absolute pride of Ireland, for him not to actually run there is a big surprise to me.
That just shows you, doesn't it, how much Breeders' Cup is a target for this horse.
I get that though. Get that because the lads are old now. They are the preeminent breeders in the Western world, and they haven't won the Breeders' Cup Classic, and they've come close with Giant's Causeway, with Declaration of War, with Henry the Navigator on a different surface. So if you ask them which race in the world they'd want to win, I suspect it would be that of the Kentucky Derby, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. What
about the second and third, both 3-year-olds? That was an interesting facet of last week. That the 2 big middle distance races, Open Age, were both dominated by the 3-year-old generation.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll get on to content. But let's just chat about the runner-up in the Juddmonte International, Kandinsky, because he ran a fantastic race in defeat, DJ. But definitely, maybe would he be Arkfav if he wasn't gelded?
It's definitely possible, as to borrow a phrase from Aidan O'Brien. Now, Kandinsky is so almost becoming a little bit of the forgotten horse in the story of the Juddmonte, because so much of the post-race analysis has become on how good City of Troy was and what City of Troy might go and be. But the thing is, any way that we look at racing and the analysis that we do, no matter how good you think City of Troy is, in my opinion, Kandinsky has to be considered pretty much as good because of the way that he went through this race. Billy mentioned about City of Troy being in front and how it probably suited him. It definitely gave him a tactical advantage given the amount of ground that Kandinsky made up. And I don't think enough was made of the fact that Kandinsky, his last 3 furlong split was around half a second quicker than what City of Troy was recording. And that was, in part because of him getting too far back to be able to put in a challenge. So Kandinsky is a real good horse himself. He's got a time form rating of 129p. And I guess he's a horse that we are going to see a hell of a lot more of because he is a gelding. And like you say, if he could run in the Arc, surely he would be favourite for it.
It looks like he's going Champion Stakes, GC. It'd be good to see him at Ascot.
Yeah, it will. And the interesting thing about this horse now is that they can afford to be pretty bold. It's not a stud reputation you're trying to protect, so they can plot his career for the next year or 2, hopefully. Ascot would be great. He can't run in the Arc, but there are plenty other options. He could go half the world away and be a very big contender for very valuable races in Hong Kong in December. And, he should stick around and be a really serious horse for next year as well. But the gelding is awkward from an Arc point of view, but it could be a mixed blessing for fans because we might get to see him a bit more. And it's a fair bet that he'll bag a lot of prize money in the next year or 2, I think.
Glad that you've taken this theme and run with it, lads. It's good to see. Billy, we're going to come to you next. We're going to stick on the Wednesday at York because it was a fantastic day, and Los Angeles was very good, wasn't he, in the Great Voltager, saddling that Group 1 penalty. Is he good enough to be a player in the Arc?
He certainly has to come into the picture now, Scoop. He's 16-1 anti-post at the moment. I had a look this morning, so I think he's definitely an each way bet at that sort of a price, you know. Again, at York at the weekend, a little bit like the Irish Derby, he just gave the impression that he was doing what he had to do. He got to the front, he kind of looked like he had his race won, and Ryan Moore had to get serious enough with him, but I always thought there was plenty in the tank. I think he's that sort of a horse. I think he just does what he has to do, and I could certainly see him improving again. Like he anyone who saw him at York last week will know he's a big, solid animal. You know, there's plenty more to come from him, you'd imagine, certainly from a physical perspective. So he's the type of horse that should be even better next year. But I do think that Paris in the fall will suit him. Soft ground won't be any issue to him at all. He handled heavy ground last year, so that will be fine. I think a well-run Arc would be right up his street. We were saying all year that he looked like their Ledger horse, but I think Ballydoyle have seemed to have moved on from that. They have other candidates now for the Ledger, the likes of Jan Bruegel. So I think, yeah, Los Angeles. No, they interestingly didn't rule out the Irish Champion Stakes. Aidan didn't directly after York, so he could come back in trip. But I think keeping him at 1.5 miles would suit him better. And I think the Arc will suit him really well. Now, they do have Opera Singer, they do have possibly Content or Continuous for the Arc as things stand. But to me, Los Angeles would be their number one horse in the race. I can't see him going off at 16-1 on the day, Ben. I'd give him a really good chance there.
Yeah, I think they think he's too good for a Ledger now, don't they? Los Angeles, even though the Voltage is obviously such a good Ledger trial in usual years. GC,
he's a difficult one to get a handle on, isn't he, Los Angeles? Because when he hits the front, he seems to do bare minimum.
Yeah, he's
so
one of them, isn't he?
With a penalty and appearing to idle, he's an interesting one, Los Angeles.
GC, just while we're on the Arc, the Al Riffa project, form boosted again in the Juddmonte.
It is, and the Eclipse form is looking a good bit healthier now than it did at the time. See the Fire also polished it by winning the Strensor at the weekend. I couldn't quite make Al Riffa a really major Arc contender just yet, but he's sort of creeping up the batting order by virtue of the horses he beat. Not just the German performance, but what he achieved at Sandown as well.
But then, gents, moving on to the Thursday. DJ, the Yorkshire Oaks, won by Content, 100 individual Group 1 winners for Galileo, as GC mentioned in the game notes. And she looks a filly, even after 12 runs, that's still learning and getting better.
Yeah, I was surprised that she managed to win in the style that she did, given how hard she pulled in the early stages. This is another career best on top of what she'd done in the Irish Oaks, which came on the back of the Pretty Polly. And she's just one of those, we see it quite often with his fillies, don't we, Aidan O'Brien? He races them a lot as 2-year-olds, but that doesn't mean that they can't still progress really well as they go up in trip throughout their second season. And Content has thrown herself very much into the reckoning for races like the Breeders' Cup filly and mares. I suppose there's a chance she could come back in trip for the Opera on Art Weekend as well, isn't there? And I guess a certain extent what she does will depend on what they do with the filly that won the Nassau, won't it? But Opera Singer, I think on Timeform ratings there's very little between them. Opera Singer 118p, Content 118 without the P. So yeah, she's come a long way all of a sudden in the last 2 or 3 runs.
Hey, DJ, put up a few options for Content there. Which path do you think she'll go down?
Me?
Yep.
I think she could follow a very similar route to last year's Yorkshire Oaks winner, Warm Heart, who went from York to the Vermeil. She went to the Breeders' Cup filly and mare Turf. She went to the Hong Kong Vaz, and then she ended up in the winning the Pegasus World Cup Invitational Turf at Gulfstream at the start of this year. I think Content is that sort of a filly. I certainly think North American turf racing would be ideal for her. We've seen how keen she is in the early stages of her races. I think going a good gallop around those tight tracks would really suit her. So look, GC touched on it earlier. She had 7 runs last year. She's had 5 already this year. She's a filly that takes her racing really well, and I think she's going to be on her travels now. So I think she's going to be busy for the end of the season, but that doesn't mean that her form is going to fall off, because I think if anything she might get better. So yeah, she's one to keep a close eye on, I think.
Yeah. You don't look at her and say she's electric, but she's just getting a little bit better with each race, and that is the sign of Galileo, and not only that, she's by Galileo out of Mecca's Angel, Jill Nunthorpe winner. There was another horse, not in the same level, but the Equator on Saturday, nearly won the Melrose by Galileo out of Quiet Reflection. So the apple doesn't fall from the tree, and no matter how much speed you put to Galileo, they still stay really well, don't they?
Absolutely. We'll get to the juveniles a bit later in the show, but we'll kick on to Friday. And GC, definitely maybe. Can fresh Bradsell kick on and win more Group 1s this autumn?
I hope he can. And I hope the Flying Five in a couple of weeks' time at the Curragh would be an ideal option. Great story, this. I'm a big admirer of Archie Watson. His link with Holly Doyle is long-standing and highly successful. And I don't know how the in-running market went on that, but I think there have been people mad keen to take a short price Bradsell after about 150 yards when that Pontos went blazing towards the far side and Holly Doyle was able to slipstream him with no trouble at all. It was clear that he was in the right slot. He didn't have a lot in hand at the line, but just the way he travelled, it made you realise a little bit of what we've been missing in that 5 furlong division for the last year or so, didn't it?
Well, definitely. And DJ, I know things went right for him, as GC said, with the pace on the far side, etc. But it's still a really good performance, especially when you look at his backstory and the couple of injuries that he's come back from.
Yeah, I think that's the key feature, and it's nice to see a horse that was precocious enough to win the Coventry. That obviously things went wrong for him at the end of his 2-year-old career. Came back to win the King's Stand again. Had an injury before this, so. It's really is a good training performance. I think that we shouldn't underestimate that he's coming back and still doing it as a colt as well, which obviously bodes well for the future for him. At stud, because there's a lot of qualities that he brings to the table that you'd like to think he'd be able to pass on to his sons and daughters down the line. But it wasn't a vintage Nunthorpe, was it, in terms of the way that it panned out? GC's touched on the draw bias. That was a bit of a downer on the whole week. I think that we can't really gloss over. Some of the most competitive races on the straight track, they really were a bit of a joke. There was a couple of sprints, weren't there? One on the Wednesday, one on the Saturday. Nearly 20 runners in each, but they were absolutely dominated by the single figure stalls, and that gave Bradsell in the Nunthorpe a huge advantage. And obviously he didn't have last year's runner-up to beat, Living the Dream. He was a non-runner. Regional was a non-runner on the day. And obviously Big Ev's ended up drawn in the car park. So I think it was a case of things coming really absolutely everything ideal for Bradsell. And I've already made a mess with a sprinter this year that I thought would go on and dominate. So I'm not going to sit here and suggest that another one might come and do the same.
Well, one quick question on Bradsell. Do you think he would still be effective at 1,200 metres, 6 furlongs? Because, as you say, he is a Coventry winner as a juvenile, but they seem to be treating him more like a horse for the minimum trip now, don't they?
I think
Watson said just 5 furlongs the next 3 races, didn't he? Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And what were the 3 then?
It was the Flying Five, the Prix de l'Abbé, and then the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Is the Breeders' Cup Sprint 5.5 at Del Mar?
I think it's 5 and a bit round the bend, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that'd be the one where it's slightly different.
Just a note of caution, if he does come for the Flying Five, he's come to the Curragh twice and disappointed twice.
Yeah,
so it would just be something to keep in the back of your mind,
He got injured in the was it the Phoenix stage?
2-year-old, yeah.
Yeah, I was saying that, just going back to the draw on the straight track, I was saying to Billy before the show that when there's a draw bias, you think it should help you out, shouldn't it? But it didn't help me. I kept back in the each-way 8s anyway. But that sprint handicap on Saturday, I think the first 9 home were drawn in stalls 1 to 10. And still managed to back the 7th. So not an easy game at York by any means. But, Billy, let's chat about Friday and the Lonsdale Cup, because Vauban bounced back to winning form for Willie Mullins.
He did, and certainly with the view to Melbourne, which his season seems to be geared around, it would give you certainly more of a you'd be more confident about him getting the trip going to Melbourne. That was one of my big question marks about him last year. Would he stay 2 miles? And this was this is the first time he's won over 2 miles on the flat. He'd won over 1 mile and 6. Okay, he ran all right in the Ascot Gold Cup over 2.5, but this is the first time he's won over 2 miles. And now you'd have to say he didn't have much in hand at the end. You know, the line came just about soon enough for him. But at the same time, it was a good performance by him. He's definitely that caliber of a horse. You know, he's had won a group race last year, so good to see him winning it. I think if he goes to Flemington, presumably he'll have more weight to carry, first of all, than last year. But as well as that, I could certainly see them riding him differently this year. You know, he hit the front 2 furlongs out in the Melbourne Cup last year. He quite clearly didn't get home. I think they'll ride him much more patiently this year. It seems to be the way to ride the track at Flemington. A lot of the winners of the Melbourne Cup in particular come from well off the gallop. I think they'll try and do that with him this year. He mightn't be Willie's only runner in the race, but just like last year, I think he'll be their number 1 hope, and he'd certainly go there with a live chance again.
It did seem to tie up in the last 100 yards. I mean, was that idling, or do you think that was stamina?
I think it's a bit of both. You know, he was in front a long way, but I do think 2 miles is just about as far as he wants to go on the flat, to be honest. You know, he'd won a 1.5 mile Group 3 in Ireland last year, so he's not short of speed. And like I said, I just think with the view to Melbourne this year, I think they'll have learned plenty, and I think they'll ride him very differently this year when they do take him down there.
I think they'll have learnt from the Lonsdale that they want to ride him for one burst, don't they? They don't want to put him there in a position where he can be vulnerable to a horse that's finishing from behind him. So it's going to take a balls of steel ride, but I think they've learnt what they need to do if they are going to win a Melbourne Cup with him.
It's well worth considering having another go, isn't it? Because again, he's a gelding. I think he picked up about 150 grand for winning the other day. You get 200 grand for finishing 4th in the Melbourne Cup. You get nearly 6 figures, lads, for finishing 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So I know it's an expensive trip to go down, but you know, you only have to run a decent race to you know, get your money back and perhaps a bit more. And I still haven't been, it's on my bucket list, but everyone who goes down there raves about the entire experience. So good on them.
Okay, this is the point in the show where I break off to speak to Oisin Murphy. We're just about to talk about See the Fire and the Sky Bet Ebor on Saturday. But yeah, first of all, I caught up with See the Fire's rider, Oisin Murphy. Hey, Oisin, yeah, we've just been talking on this week's racing podcast about York last week, and it was a fantastic one for you in the end with 4 winners.
Thank God, Ben. I'd have taken 4 winners at the start of the week. We know how competitive the York Ebor Festival is, and certainly it was nice to end it on a good note Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, you won on Scenic, Cool, Hoof Loop, See the Fire, and Tropical Storm. What was your favourite winner out of the 4?
See the Fire for sure. It was great that she backed up her Nassau run with an electric turn of foot in the Strensel Stakes. I really enjoyed riding her, Ben. Scenic travelled very strongly. The race set up nicely for her. Cool Hoof Luke, I obviously tried riding him a little bit differently this time, and it worked. And Tropical Storm breaking his maiden in a listed race, the Roses Stakes. I mean, he went into the race one of the highest rated maidens in the country. So it was fantastic that he was able to get off the mark as well.
Yeah, just expanding on See the Fire. It looked at one stage like you had a choice whether to go on the outside or on the inside. How you know, what's the word? I don't know. It's how vital was it that you went that inside route?
Yeah, she's a filly I think wants cover and doesn't want to be exposed too soon in a race. She wouldn't have appreciated being ridden 3 wide even with cover. So I was glad it opened up, and I obviously needed a little bit of luck, particularly when they went slow. The finishing sections were incredibly fast, and yeah, I was on the right horse to finish with such a burst.
Yeah, and finally on See the Fire, what route could she take this autumn? Do you think she could win at the highest level even?
Yeah, it's likely she'll go for the Prix de l'Opera at Longchamp. I'd imagine she'll be favourite, and hopefully now she stays healthy between now and then. She looked fine this morning, and yeah, it's exciting.
Great stuff. Just finally on York, Oisin, have you got one from last week that you lost on that you think we should maybe be following this autumn?
For sure, Spellmaster. He had an inside draw, and he's not the bravest fella, and he travelled in snatches, and I think he'll handle cutting the ground very well. Sheikh Fahd actually bred him. He's out of a mare by Al Kazim. Johnny Murtagh trained her for Qatar racing, and she enjoyed digging the ground. And this fella's a son of Kamiko that's improving all the time, and I think he's more than capable of winning off his nursery mark.
Excellent. That's Spellmaster to get in your trackers, listeners. Right then, finally, Shane, let's look ahead to this weekend. It's obviously a little bit quiet between York and Doncaster, you know, in terms of big festivals, certainly. But there's good racing at Sandown on Saturday, and there's a good horse on show in Tamfana that you're likely to be riding in the Group 3 Atalanta Stakes.
Yeah, I ride Tam Fan on Saturday. She's been perfect since not staying in France last time. I was sure she would see out a mile and a half, but she didn't in the Grand Prix de Paris. And she's obviously coming all the way back to a mile now, but her Guineas run in the Kipco 1000 Guineas was fantastic. And she's freshened up for this race, and she's clear on ratings. So it's yeah, I'm looking forward to getting the leg up on her for sure, Ben.
Looks a good opportunity. Do you think this dropping right back to a mile sort of helps decide where to go with the rest of the year?
Well, Sandown is a stiff track, as you know, and where she'll meet the ground, and I think she'll appreciate that.
Okay, also at Sandown on Saturday, the Sky Bet Salario Stakes, Group 3 for 2-year-olds and possibly on Royal Playwright.
Yeah, Royal Playwright. I had a little workout this morning. I rode him, and he's in good shape. He's obviously going into the race still a little bit inexperienced. The Salario takes a bit of winning. We won it a few years ago with a Qatar horse called South Seas. Kamiko was actually beaten in the race himself. It was my fault. I got stuck in traffic. But Royal Playwright has the right profile. He'll definitely appreciate a stiff 7. I think Hugo Parma's horse here could be the one to beat. I worked with him at Wolverhampton about 10 days ago, and Seagull's 11, I think his name is. I really respect him, and I think he'll improve for that track as well. So look, the race is going to take a bit of winning, and I'm sure Aidan O'Brien might run one as well. But it's nice to be part of it and going there with a live chance.
Royal Playwright, of course, half brother to See the Fire. Is there any similarities?
He's a bit taller than his mother. He's very straightforward. If anything, he's an easier ride. Obviously, their dam, Arabian Queen, was a superstar. So hopefully one of them can live up to their mother's supreme qualities.
As always, Shane, thanks a lot and good luck this weekend.
Cheers, Ben. Take care.
This is Sporting Life.
Oisin Murphy in good form there. He was very pleased with See the Fire at York GC, and he says that she is going back to have a crack at the top level in the Prix de l'Opera on Arc weekend.
Yeah, good to see. Lovely ride, very patient, good turn of foot. She had the form to win it quite tidily, and she did. And am I right? She's a product of 2 international winners, isn't she? Australia out of Arabian Queen. So that is a real. She by See the Stars?
Yeah.
Sorry, See the Stars out of Arabian Queen. But no, she's really come good after being quite highly tried earlier. She looked magnificent. I didn't go to the paddock for all the races, but she was gleaming like a conker. So she's in terrific form at the moment, and she deserves another crack at the high level. Which race is she going for, Ben?
The Prix de l'Opera.
Is she? Fair enough. Yeah, and a good week for Jeff Smith. You know, he aimed high with Ghostwriter, and he came up. Oh, Ghostwriter is a horse we should have a quick word about, because if Kandinsky's crept under the radar, I think Ghostwriter has to a certain extent. I'm not sure he'll win a Group 1, but there's definitely a pretty good race in him after his third.
The story yesterday saying that he could go for the Irish champion, Ghostwriter.
Righto.
Right, so yeah, he could be going to the Curragh. Leopardstown, I mean, sorry.
What do you think trip-wise on See the Fire? Because obviously the Nassau run, it was very easy to look at that and think, oh, she must have improved for the step up in trip. But then she's dropped back to 9 here. She's basically won this with a turn of foot, and it's a speed that's got herself out of trouble. And I mean, I think the 2 races are the same weekend, aren't they? The Sun Chariot and the L'Opera. But I think she'd face far less stiff opposition in the Sun Chariot than what she would in the Prix de l'Opera. So I think if it was me, I'd be tempted to go Sun Chariot with her.
Looks to have gone
She's not
quicker,
in the
doesn't
making,
she,
to be honest.
as the season's gone on?
Yeah, exactly. She just sort of thrived and improved, like you say, as the season's gone on.
Murphy had a good week, didn't he? Pretty good. It didn't start very well. He had a few fancy horses, didn't quite make it, but as the week went on, he seemed to be getting on a roll towards the end.
Yeah, 4 winners in the end for Oisin Murphy. Let's touch on a couple of topics. GC, the Sky Bet City of York Stakes, Group 2.
Oh,
They've been trying to get this to Group 1 for years, but it wasn't a good renewal, was it?
well, you know my thoughts. I think it's a plan with a flaw in it, because you can't just give everything Group 1 status and expect the European pattern not to suffer. And the Prix Moulin is not too far away, and the Sussex Stakes is not too far behind us. I admire York's determination to aim up. I really do, but that race, by and large, does not really justify being a Group 1. And Saturday's renewal was, I think, a fairly strong contender for one of the most moderate £500,000 races ever run. And I was kicking myself up. I finally let that audience draw me in, and he goes and reverts to type with a run like that. But hats off to the Queens for running Briege. She wouldn't normally be a filly you'd think would be a prime contender for a race like that, but £500,000 in total prize money, and the bulk of it went their way.
Yeah, I think he might have been a bit unlucky with audience in the way that he got upset from Lake Forest being in the stall next door and getting withdrawn. I think it just lit him up a little bit, didn't it? Unfortunately.
Quick line on the Gustons week, because Emily ran okay, no better. Audience was a disappointment on the figures. Don't think they had a winner on the week, did they?
This is the thing, isn't
No.
it? They just haven't really got the top quality horses at the moment this year, in the strength in depth that they've had in the last few seasons, and that's why poor Schumacher's getting it in the neck. But he just hasn't had the material to work with, has he, this year? That's the crux of it for me.
No pressure on. Is it Field of Gold, Solario favourite for this weekend? Because they need to find a couple of good young ones, don't they, to fan the flames of optimism for 2025.
The Sky Bet Ebor on Saturday went to Magical Zoe for Henry de Bromhead, but another talking point was how lowly rated you could be and get in the race. Bottom weight was rated 86. I mean, should we be concerned about this?
Well, I think there are mitigating circumstances here, because the Ebor is getting squeezed from various directions. The 1.5 mile handicap is now a very valuable race at York. So is the 2 mile handicap. You have the Lonsdale Cup. You have multiple races in the league, the Racing League, which are not as valuable as the Ebor, but they do attract 90+ rated stayers. So I don't particularly buy the idea that there's a massive talent drain. I think the Timeform lads would be able to, to confirm this with a bit of time, but I suspect there are almost as many 90+ rated stayers in training as there ever were, but I think they're being pulled in different directions nowadays. Would you agree with that, lads, or not?
I'd have a slightly different take. I do think that there is an issue with regard to talent drain, and what I was going to do to suggest that to look at that is obviously the Melrose is the perfect starting point for the following year's Ebor field, and well, last year's was won by Middle Earth, who hung around for the first half of the season, but Kieran Maher took an interest in the horse, bought a half share, and unsurprisingly, he's been whisked off for the second half of the season, and Melbourne's going to be his main option in the second half of the year. Denmark finished second. He was sold for 240,000 guineas to Australia in the horses in training last year. The third horse, he has hung around and probably just hasn't taken his form to the level that made him a serious Ebor contender. But the fourth was the same as Denmark, sold at the end of the season and gone to Australia. So, there's 3 horses there that normal service, you would have expected them to graduate to an Ebor, but they just aren't around because they've gone. And I think another factor with regards to it is, for so long it was so difficult to run in an Ebor that with there not being a consolation race, if you were rated, I don't know, say 90 or below, you probably wouldn't even bother entering. Whereas now, I think maybe if they realise that there isn't the clamour to run in the race that there once was, you might enter with a lower rating and have a greater chance of getting in. So I think you might see it sort of come back up a little bit next year, but it is, I think there is an issue. And like I say, I don't think it's going away because Australia do tend to come calling for the ideal type of horse that would be targeted at it.
It's not going to happen, but I'd be interested to hear all your opinions on my suggestion that the conversation about allowing 3-year-olds back into the Ebor is one worth having. It's an evolving situation, and if you want your 3-year-olds to stick around, maybe dangle that carrot of being able to run in the Ebor, or to have a proper group racehorse, in the handicap with a mark in the high teens or whatever, with the weight for age would make it, I think, a much more compelling proposition. I'm not knocking York. I adore York. It's always been my favourite track. But those handicaps at that meeting now, because of the increased value, 6 to 1 the field, 7 to 1 the field, 8 to 1 the field, relentlessly. There has to be room for races where there are strongly improving 3-year-olds that punters can take a view on. But it seems a little too much of the same nowadays. All massive fields, all wide open.
Right, Magical Zoe, Henry de Bromhead, we know he can do it over jumps, but he can do it on the flat as well.
We've done a couple of times during the summer scoop. He's had quite a good season on the flat, Henry de Bromhead. And yeah, Magical Zoe, look, she's a filly that I was quite sweet on for the race, but like the lads, I was expecting her to be 12 or 14 to 1. I thought she was going to be a really good each way bet at that price. I didn't expect her to go off favourite. And I think that was just a reflection of the quality of the race as a whole on the day. There were various different reasons for that. GC was saying about maybe having a proper group horse in the race. Harbour Wind looked like he might have been that horse for Dermot Weld. I don't know why he didn't run. He was being targeted at the race. He would have carried top weight. He'd have been a bit of added a bit of class to the contest, but he wasn't there. And Magical Zoe, she looked on a good mark based on her hurdles form. She was unexposed on the flat. She was unexposed at this sort of trip, and she went and she won quite well. She won off a mark of 102. Apparently they're heading for the Melbourne Cup with her. I'd have a slight niggle about her getting 2 miles on the flat. She tried 2.5 once over hurdles and patently didn't get the trip. So even though she's by Shantou, I'm not sure a well-run 2 miles would be fully up her street. I didn't think she had a massive amount in hand at the line the last day. But look, she's fully entitled to go there. She's fully entitled to take her chance. The one horse that really leapt out at me watching the race, the big eye catcher in the race, was the Willie Mullins horse, Hip Hop Del War. He surely would have gone very close had he got a clear run. He got stopped on a couple of occasions in the straight. We don't know much about him. Willie doesn't have him that long, but surely on that evidence, he's a horse that's going to pick up a good prize between now and the end of the season. The Irish Azara, which looks tailor-made for him, very valuable handicap. And on top of that, he's a novice over hurdles. He finished second at Galway, his only start. Surely there'll be loads of races to be targeted at. Absurd won the race for Willie last year, went on to win the county hurdle. I'm not saying Hip Hop Del War will win a county hurdle, but I could certainly see him going down that sort of route later in the campaign. But before then, I think he'll win a big handicap on the flat.
It seemed like Ireland, as you know, have won 8 of the last 16 Ebors.
Yeah.
I think a few of the Irish lads have found the knack, perfected the knack of getting a horse who's unexposed in one way or another into that race. Whereas a lot of British horses have been banging heads against each other in those valuable handicaps, giving the assessor a good chance to get a handle on them. But, as you said, Billy, the 2 horses who were probably the best handicap horse in the race were the winner, and a horse who's got Polish form and one running a maiden hurdle. The real unexposed types. Magical Zoe had only had 3 flat runs, hadn't she?
That's all, yeah. Yeah, and like she started in a listed race, she won a maiden, and then she finished third in the Group 3. So, it's not like they'd been hiding her, but at the same time, she got in off a mark of 102, which based on her hurdles form did look a little on the lenient side, and so it proved. But yeah, I would totally agree with you. Just looking at the race at the weekend, outside of Magical Zoe and possibly Hip Hop Del War, there really wasn't that many progressive up-and-coming horses in the race,
And if it's your best handicap of the season, which the Ebor probably is, there has to be room for that type of horse one way or another. It's just a more compelling spectacle all around if you find those horses.
I think what the Irish do better than their British counterparts is, like you say, they can campaign them in regards, and it's not like they're doing anything wrong. It's just that in terms of how they get the horses, they sort of improve over jumps, and then they come back to the flat with the lenient handicap mark, because the flat mark has had to be left alone. And it's a pattern that you see not just in the Ebor, but think about all the races like the Ascot Stakes, and even the Chester Cup they started coming over and having a good go at, and it's just something that they do better than the British.
And she was punted accordingly, wasn't she? It takes a substantial amount of money to move a horse in an Ebor market like she moved at the weekend.
Yeah. Very well backed. Magical Zoe, winner of the Sky Bet Ebor. Plenty to chew on coming out of the Ebor this year. Get thinking of your Saturday bets, gents. We're nearly at the end of the show, but we're just going to touch on a couple of the juveniles from last week at York. GC, definitely maybe. Is the Lion in Winter the real deal?
Well, he might be. He might be. And people will say, well, he's being aimed at a sales race next. Well, of course he is. He's going to be massively well in a race that's way more valuable than most of the group races. But I'm sure Billy and David will back me up. But for him to be doing what he's done, is it time for 115 after 2 runs by See the Stars out of a really strong middle distance family? If that's not a horse who should go on and make his mark at a high level next year, I don't know what is.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it, DJ?
Absolutely, yeah. I was surprised, really surprised that he's as big as 8-1 for the Guineas, and I can only think that that's people with burnt fingers from City of Troy and August Rodin that think Aidan O'Brien can't train a 2,000 Guineas winner anymore, because what he's done, that rating of 115 at this stage of the season, based on the pedigree, he's got to be a 120 horse next year, if not more, hasn't he? And I must say, I think I'm going to have to take some of that 8-1, because what he's done there does suggest that he's going to be well up to winning a Group 1 at some stage, I think.
Are we opening the points locker here, David?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I think so.
Points?
Yeah, 1 point win, the Lion in Winter, 8-1.
I like it. I like it. Billy, we talked about it on the show last week. It's an unusual route for Aidan O'Brien, really, to go to the Acomb Stakes with a horse like this.
Very unusual, and I think it was, is it 2000 was the last time he won it? He certainly hasn't won it that often in the past. He probably hasn't targeted that often. They did change the conditions of the race, which obviously made it a bit more appealing to him and the likes of Godolphin will rule in court. So it looked an above average renewal of the Acomb. We certainly got an above average winner. He's much more than the Morning Glory scoop. There you go, GC. But yeah, he was deeply impressive, and as the lads were saying, for him to be doing what he can do now, looking at his pedigree, it augurs really well. But it was a good week. It was a good week all round for Ballydoyle. They had a good weekend as well. They had a couple of big guns at the Curragh in the 2-year-old races. Henri Matisse went and won the Futurity. This is a horse I really like. He's one that I think we're only just scratching the surface of. He's 3 from 3, but in all 3 of his races, he's looked very green. He nearly dislodged Ryan Moore the last day in the final furlong, jinking to his left once he got to the front. Still recovered to win with a bit up his sleeve. I think there's loads more to come from him, but unlike the Lion in Winter, who's bred very much to be a better horse next year, if you look at Henri Matisse's breeding, he's by Wootton Bassett. He's a half-brother to Tenebrism, who won the Cheveley Park Stakes, and a filly called Statuette, who only ran twice for O'Brien and was unbeaten as a 2-year-old. We didn't see her since. He's out of Immortal Verse, who, of course, was a really good miler. So I think Henri Matisse is a colt that we're going to see more of this year. The Lion in Winter obviously going to the Goffs Million. Henri Matisse, the National Stakes has been penciled in, but I could see him running in something like that, or a Dewhurst, and I could see him possibly going to the States afterwards for a Breeders' Cup Juvenile turf. I think they'll try and make hay with this fella. He clearly takes his racing well. It doesn't seem to take anything out of him. His time form rating advanced a small bit, up to 112p, but I think he'll definitely improve on that before the end of the season. And although I think the Lion in Winter is going to be a better horse than him, I could see Henri Matisse ending the season as Aidan O'Brien's top-rated juvenile colt.
Yeah, other 2-year-olds from last week, David. What about this Pool Hoof Luke that won the Gym Crack under Oisin Murphy? Do you think he could be a player in the autumn Group 1s?
Possibly. I don't think it was a strong Gym Crack. It was sort of similar to the year before. I think we rated Lake Forest quite a low rating, and Cool Who Fluke only rating of 108, Shadow of Light 105, Symbol of Strength 105 as well. So by no means a vintage race, and I do think the Irish sprinting 2-year-olds look to have the edge at the minute.
Okay, we're nearly there, gents. Has anyone got anything else to say about York or anything before we go into the weekend?
Say something about Cool Who Fluke. I didn't particularly fancy him, but my better half was at York with a pal of hers on a day out, and I told them both while we had a coffee beforehand about Oisin Murphy's ups and downs in recent times, and I couldn't fancy the balding horse in the gym crack, but I got a message afterwards saying, yeah, had to go with Oisin Murphy there just because of the piles. I think, well, you're undefeated. What chance have you got if people are just backing horses on that reason?
Hemorrhoid form, yeah.
It's a really quiet weekend, gents, but it's pretty good at Sandown. Has anyone got any fancies before we wrap up the podcast?
Well, no bankers. I'm looking forward to the Beverley Bullet, and I don't know whether it's going to rain at all. I hope it does, because think I'd be happy to give Desperate Hero another chance in the Beverley Bullet. He looked so progressive prior to Goodwood when he didn't run his race on fast ground. I think there's a pretty smart horse there, and if he gets some giving the ground, he might be a price.
It's a good horse, isn't he? The way he won at Hamilton, and even the way he ran at Sandown.
Yes.
There's a good horse in there.
But I think he would, some rain would be ideal, perhaps.
Strong from over here, Scoop, but there is the Irish Cambridgeshire on Saturday at the Curragh. Wide open race, and look, I'd have to wait until nearer the time to nail down an actual bet in the race, because obviously draw on ground and whatever is going to play a big factor in this. But there's a couple of horses that kind of stood out to me when I was looking through the race this morning. One is State Actor of Bill Farrell's, who's an unexposed horse, failed to justify favouritism in a big handicap. I think it was Guineas weekend, might have been Derby weekend. Things just didn't pan out ideally for him that day. I think there's more to come from him, especially if the rain comes. He'll like a cut in the ground. But the other really interesting one is a horse that Johnny Fiends called Vera's Secret. Had 3 runs last year, made her seasonal reappearance / handicap debut a couple of weeks back. Absolutely bolted up on a handicap. She won by 6.5 lengths. Got £19 for that win, but that's been revised down slightly. I think she's will have to carry a mark £17 or so higher than the one it won off. But it was so impressive that day. There must be more to come from it. So I'd be really interested in that if it takes its chance. There looks like a horse that had a big prize in it on that occasion. So certainly one to keep an eye out for.
Billy, a quick word. We haven't mentioned him. What a sort of breath of fresh air that Extensio story was at York last week, wasn't it?
Yeah, hats off to Pat O'Donnell, for a fella that only trains a handful of horses, and it literally is a handful of horses these days. It was a well thought out plan from him. This had been the plan for a long way back. Extensio he's clearly something of a family pet. Pat's daughter Sylvia has won on him a couple of times, and yeah, like it was a great victory for them. But look, he has form in this. Like he had a Cheltenham Festival winner 20 odd years ago, so the man knows how to train horses, and just the fact that he doesn't have too many and wouldn't have many winners, that doesn't mean he hasn't forgotten how to do it, as he showed the other day. So great win for them, and like I said, hats off to them, because it's not an easy thing to do.
Fantastic story, that. Is it Cesaro for him next, Billy, do we think?
I would imagine so, yeah. That would look the logical option for him.
Extensio wants to look out for it at Newmarket later in the season. Well, time has beaten us. Thank you very much, gents, GC, DJ and Billy. Thank you, listeners, for joining us and listening to our reflections on York, and we'll be back again next week.
Download the Sporting Life app for the best racing coverage, including live racing blogs, fast results, stable tours, trainer and jockey interviews, expert opinion and tips.